All right, I'm going to officially begin this and get more into that. So I'm glad that for everyone who's joined us to learn about the age of the Earth, we're going to skip the next slide. So can you just go 2 slides on and just right straight to Dr. Hudson's introduction?
Ago, we presented the subject of the origin of the oceans. It was there where creationists felt they had a fairly strong case in talking about the Genesis flood, explaining rather well the fossil layers and sedimentary rock that we have in the world. Today we talk about the origin of the Earth. We're talking about the age of the Earth and the way that science today uses methods to date the age of rocks. Here's a place where evolutionists feel they have a strong answer, a strong point to make. Right now, we're going to turn everything over once again to our local hosts.
All right, thank you, Dr. Hudson. All right, we're officially beginning the presentation now. So I want to thank everyone again for joining us. This is the 5th presentation on origins. In the first presentation, we talked about the origin of the debate itself and the conflicting views on where we came from. Popular science says one thing, though through the worldview they bring with them, and then we have people of faith, scientists among them whose worldview is quite different. At the second presentation, we talked about the origin of human beings, where you and I came from, and the conflicting views on that. We talked about some of the evidence and how that evidence has fared under closer scrutiny. In our third session, we talked about the origin of the oceans as perhaps the remnants of the flood of Noah. We examined the evidence of the flooding of the world from the histories of different cultures, peoples, and tribes, as well as from the geological record. At our fourth meeting, we talked about the origins of dinosaurs and how they fit into the conflicting views on origins. We hinted at some of the evidence from a T-Rex bone being studied in the laboratory, something we'll talk more about today. Now, and so I'm doing the 5th presentation. And as you might have heard before we began this presentation, I'll be presenting Dr. Hudson's material, but I'm going to be doing it with a critical eye. And during the first 4 presentations, one thing I couldn't help noticing was the political origins of this series. Christians in the United States were once used to having the power to prevent science that cast doubt on their scriptures from being taught in schools. And since Christians have lost that power, we've been trying to force our version of origins to be taught in schools along with science. And this is all really teaching of science. I'm going to defend that. I know many Christians are not ready to apologize for that, but since I'm speaking on behalf of Christians today, I do apologize. And I'm sorry that we Christians have tried to interfere with the spread of the results of free scientific inquiry. So in this session, we're going to talk about the origin of the Earth, in particular time as it relates to the age of the Earth. This is an important topic. In fact, this is the most challenging area creationists must deal with in our presentation to the world about origins. Let's move to the next slide. We're going to start off by reading this quote. It says, the most widely used mutation rate for non-coding human mitochondrial DNA relies on estimates of the date when humans and chimpanzees shared a common ancestor taken to be 5 million years ago. But a few studies have begun to suggest that the actual rates are much faster. Evolutionists are most concerned about the effect of a faster mutation rate. Researchers have calculated that mitochondrial Eve lived 100,000 years ago in Africa. Using the new clock, she would be a mere 6,000 years old. No one thinks that's the case. All right, reading carefully, mitochondrial Eve, we're talking about the first human ancestor. So we're talking, assuming that that there was a common ancestor of humans and chimpanzees. Looking at the differences in our DNA at this point, and how and the rate at which our DNA changes, we are using that as a clock to calculate how far back in time the first human ancestor appeared. So we're looking. So using this new clock, she would be a mere 6,000 years old. No one thinks that's the case. Well, if we're looking at the first human ancestor, female human ancestor, 6,000 years is about right for us. Now, when I first looked at this, I misunderstood the argument. I thought they were arguing that 6,000 years ago there was a common ancestor of humans and chimpanzees, and that supported creation, which of course it would not. But that's an example of how we need to understand and closely scrutinize what we're looking at. Some Christians speak as if casting doubt on scientific theories of origins proves the Christian understanding of origins, which is complete nonsense, because Christianity is not the only religion around. So I lived in Malaysia on the island of Penang, and there were Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, and various denominations of Christians, each with their own understanding of origins. So we Christians have no more right for our understanding of origins to be given special consideration than do followers of any other religion. Let's see. All right. So age issues. Both science and Christianity are founded on the understanding that we humans have limitations and can be wrong. And I appreciate that about science. True scientists are always looking for flaws in their own conclusions. And true Christians are always ready to confess when they are wrong and not try to cover it up or dig in. Now, when scientists search for flaws in their own conclusions, it helps science to progress. So we should all be aware of our limitations and open to the possibility that we could be wrong about anything. Now, where science differs from Christianity is that it's not looking for a single authoritative source of truth. Christians believe that there is an all-knowing God who communicated truth to us through the authors of the Bible, and that we can rely on their testimony. And science only threatens Christianity when it calls into question the reliability of the Bible. Now, based on the Bible account, we would expect all the remains of living creatures that are buried in the earth to have been buried within the last few thousand years. As I said earlier, the Bible doesn't give us enough detail to know when the earth itself began to be created, but the idea of death, suffering as being a result of sin would indicate that you wouldn't find evidence of that before the past few thousand years. Now, if we find creatures that suffered and died and were buried before the Bible says death began on this planet, then the Bible is not a trustworthy account. And we have to be able to accept that we could be wrong about trusting it. Now, Archbishop Usher tried to calculate the beginning of creation, and he uh, came on the date October 29, 4004 BC. I think might be a little over precise, maybe trying to take stretch the evidence a little too far, possibly, but I haven't had a chance to look into his full reasoning. Just as there's other things in this presentation I haven't had a chance to look into fully. I'll let you know if there's something I found questionable about them, but um, we'll and we should always be. I trust the people who do the work. I want to listen to the person who actually does look into things, check things out, and isn't satisfied to just say I heard or read this kind of thing. Some people try to stretch the evidence even further to say that God must have started creation at 9 in the morning. This is 1656. It says here that view is held for a number of centuries in Western theology. I would say there were people that held that view. I wouldn't say that it was a universal view. We're not trying to defend that. We're just trying to mention it as a starting point for how views have changed. So James Hutton, the father of modern geology, proposed uniformitarianism. His idea was, rather than explain features on the Earth using processes that we're not able to observe today, let's just see if we can explain it using processes that we can observe today. So that ruled out a worldwide flood because we never have the opportunity to observe that. And he felt like this uniformitarianism was capable of explaining everything that he could see or would be able to explain it in the future. He said in his theory of the Earth, we find no vestige of a beginning and no prospect of an end. Now, uniformitarianism is not the current understanding of science. Scientists now recognize that the Earth's features have been formed by quite a number of catastrophes: earthquakes, floods, volcanic eruptions, and asteroid impacts. We need to keep advancing the slides. Sorry. If we could get the TV on in the back, I'll actually be able to see whether we're advancing the slides. Okay, Enid's going down. Thank you. All right. So do we have someone who can go to the next slide? Okay, so we've got some mountains here. And what got English scientists wondering when they looked at these mountains was, if you look at the current rate of erosion, these mountains look a lot older than the Genesis flood. So an explanation that the flood could have formed it seemed inadequate to them, and they began to wonder. So Charles Lyell started calculating how long currently observable processes would take to produce features found on Earth today. And he concluded that some were millions of years old. He saw no reason to assume any limit to the age of the Earth, just like Hutton. The things could have been going on indefinitely. And Charles, he wrote about it in his book, Principles of Geology, which Charles Darwin had with him when he was sailing on the Beagle. Charles Darwin had volume 1, and Lyell got him the second volume on one of his stops in South America. Now, William Thomson, we know him as Baron Kelvin, and we've got the Kelvin temperature scale. He was a heat and energy researcher. He had a problem with this unlimited time that the geologists were talking about. He challenged them. He said the Earth had to have had a beginning. Now let's start the rate at which the surface of the Earth is cooling off. If you look at the rate at which the surface of the Earth is cooling, you wind that back 20 to 40 million years ago, the surface of the Earth would be molten. So he figured that that was the limit, the oldest that the Earth could be. Any solid feature, at least on the Earth, couldn't be older than 20 to 40 million years old. He couldn't calculate more precisely than that because the temperature loss measurements didn't provide any further precision. And then it turned out that his calculations were incorrect because he was assuming that only the surface of the Earth cools off. And we now know that the Earth has a molten interior. So it's not just the surface that's cooling off, but also the interior. So the rate of cooling to get to the takes a lot longer because there's not as much heat difference between the core of the Earth and the surface as Baron Kelvin was assuming there would be. Ernest Rutherford also recognized that radioactive decay would be a source of additional heat. So it wouldn't just be from the time that Earth in the past might have been molten, but there's been additional heat produced during that time, since then. So we now have a much older date. Let's move to the next slide. Currently accepted age of the Earth. It's 4.5 billion years. So we to get this age, we look at the radiometric dating of rocks, but before rocks they're formed, we don't have that. So we're using Big Bang cosmology and the star formation to make some assumptions there. The Earth looks really old, and I don't really have a problem with that. Move to the next slide. Earth being old doesn't contradict the Bible. Like I said, the Bible is not a geology textbook. It doesn't give us all those details because that's not the reason that not what God was trying to communicate, which is what I believe it is, God's communication to us. But so evolutionists are not looking, like I said, they're not looking for a single authoritative source of truth. So where are they going to be reading their information? What would be their Bible? So let's go to the next slide. For an evolutionist, it's the geologic column. So you assume that the layers of rock had to have been laid down in order. So the top layers are the most recent, the bottom layers are the oldest. And as far as we know, there's no way that could have been reversed or changed around. So keep pressing the space bar. And there we go. So we have the standard view showing millions of years in the far left column. So from the present to 63 million years ago is in the green, 63 to 230 in blue, 230 to 4.5 billion in purple. So the layers are categorized. These colors represent the types of life forms that they contain. So, and the areas they are called like Paleozoic. That means old life forms. Mesozoic, middle life forms. Cenozoic, recent life forms. That's these labels on the right of the chart. Okay, and let's advance the slide another time. All right, so geologists view lots of different events in the fossil record. So including the sudden appearance and the disappearance of animals in various kinds of extinctions. So that's how they interpret the different life forms being found in these rocks. The animal must have evolved sometime before it appeared in this rock, and then and not and if we didn't find it, and we probably won't find it earlier because it hadn't evolved yet. If we don't find it later, it's probably because it went extinct. So now we have a different. The Bible has a different explanation of how these layers of rocks and and animal remains came to be found on Earth. But no matter what we believe, if there is a clock that can tell us the ages of rocks, wouldn't we want to know how to read it? So how can you tell how old a rock is? Move on to the next slide or advance. There we go. So this is Plymouth Rock in Massachusetts. It has 1620 carved in to remember the Pilgrims. It's not the age of the rock. Let's move on to the next slide. There are three major types of rock. There's sedimentary rock, which is rock that has been material laid down over time, and therefore is called sedimentary. There is, igneous, that means fire. That means that rock was once molten. And then metamorphic rock, that means that rock was sedimentary, but then through heat, that rock has been changed. Properties have been changed. So things like marble. So igneous would be granite, quartz, and basalt. And the only types of rocks that we can date using any kind of atomic clock are the igneous rocks, because the other two types of rock are made of a mixture of things, and we don't have a real way to determine when a mixture was started. So let's advance the slide. And to read the clock, we have to make we have to know three things. We have to know that there's a constant decay rate. Next one. Okay, we need to know the initial ratios of the elements in that decay and the decay products in the rock. And three, we need to know that the rock samples have been chemically and physically isolated since the rock was formed. So even with igneous rock, only certain rocks can be reliably dated. So let's look at our next slide and make sure we can understand what this decay rate part is about. So you take an element and does everyone already know what a half-life is? All right, there are some elements that over time lose a part of themselves and they become another element. Now, when you get a particular particle of that element, you do not know when that atom is going to lose that part of itself and turn into a different kind of atom. But if you get enough of those atoms together, you can know that half of them, you don't know which half, but half of them are going to lose a part of themselves and turn into a different kind of atoms, and then over a period of time. That's the half-life. And we have found this, so far we know of no way of varying the half-lives. So these radioactive elements, they randomly turn into other elements, but when you get enough of them together, the rate is constant. So let's advance the slide. Okay, so the parent becomes less, and the daughter, or it's not always a different element. Sometimes you just lose a neutron, still the same element, but a different isotope. The daughter isotope accumulates. The uh, and uh, and from the ratio of the daughter isotopes to the parent isotopes, you can determine how long that material has been there. So we're going to look at a couple of these today. First one we're going to look at is carbon-14. And this method is used in dating things that were once alive, and it measures the ratio of normal carbon-12 to heavy, which has a half-life of 5,000 years. So not able to get dates in the millions of years, but it does often give dates that are older than biblical chronologies. So where does carbon-14 come from, and how do they use carbon-14 to interpret dates? Let's all right. So let's make sure we can understand this. So in the upper atmosphere of the Earth, there are constantly cosmic rays hitting nitrogen atoms, and sometimes when a neutron hits a nitrogen, it will exit as a proton instead of remaining a neutron, leaving behind in the nitrogen atom, which turns it into a carbon-14 atom. So carbon has 7 protons, nitrogen has 8, so now they both have added together, protons and neutrons, 14, but the nitrogen has now turned into carbon. And fortunately for our atomic clock, carbon-14 reacts chemically the same as normal carbon-12. Let's advance. Oh, we're already there. Goes into plants, and over time, those plants get nibbled by animals, and then the animal will die, and it will stop taking carbon into its body, and that carbon-14 will then start turning, start into nitrogen-14. That extra neutron in the carbon-14 emits an electron and turns back into a proton, and turns into nitrogen. And because no additional carbon is being replenished into the cell's body after it dies, we can see the nitrogen or the carbon-14 get less compared with the regular carbon. So how much carbon-14 is in the body compared to carbon-12 will tell you how long ago that creature lived, or how, when it ceased getting carbon-14 in its body. So it's the ending date for its obituary. So. But for radiometric dating to work, next slide, you have to know how much of the original material you're starting with. So volcanoes eject lots of carbon-12 into the atmosphere. So this can mean that plants and animals during a period of volcanism, or when they die, have a lot more carbon-12 in them than live at a normal time when there's more carbon-14 in the atmosphere. So they look older. So you have to correct carbon-14 dating for geologic events in the past, do a lot of adjustments, comparisons of things that you know of known historical dates, and as a result, scientists as far back as cautionary red flags regarding the reliability of carbon-14 dating. So the troubles of the radiocarbon dating method are undeniably deep and serious. It should be no surprise then that fully half of the dates are. The wonder is surely that the remaining half come to be accepted. There are gross discrepancies. The chronology is uneven and relative, and the accepted dates are collected dates. And these comments come from people who work with this method of dating. We got to recognize, though, that doesn't prove creation, doesn't prove the flood. It just tells us if we let science go without interference, it might get there. So now let's examine another method of dating. Next slide. So this is potassium results in millions of years. And this is where the big differences come in terms of biblical chronology. Lava from volcanoes. So the potassium 40 that's in lava slowly breaks down into argon 40, which is a gas. And lava is a liquid. The argon 40 escapes into the air. Now, and potassium's 40's half-life is very long. So when the hot to basalt, argon 40 made after gets trapped in the rock. And so you can look at the ratio of potassium to argon to see how long ago that rock. And so we got a half-life, potassium 40 of 1.25 billion years for half of it to decay. So that's the clock that we're using for the really old rocks. So, and wouldn't be a problem for creationists because, like I said, the Bible doesn't give us much detail about time that far back. We have lava flows between fossil layers that date to millions of years. And that's the problem that calls into question the reliability of the Bible. Creationists believe that the fossil layers are just a few thousand years old. So how can there be lava flows in between them that are millions of years old? So look at the weak method I was talking about earlier, trying to cast some doubt on this potassium argon dating. So let's look at the three things you're going to radiometric dates that do not add up, living fossils, missing rocks, and miracles of preservation. I'm sorry, that's 4. The next slide. Radiometric dates. This is the Winkeret Plateau in the Grand Canyon, basaltic rocks. So you've got some rocks that by potassium argon dating at the top, they are 0.01 to 17 million years old. So there have been some unreliable measurements made there. And then if you go to keep advancing, underneath them there is Cardenas basalt. By potassium argon dating, you get the 791 to 853 million years, which you would expect. Older rock should be below younger rock. But in the other dating methods, like rubidium strontium, you get a younger date below the older date. Now, this doesn't give us any way to explain how rocks could look older than they are. It shows rocks looking younger than we would expect them to look. So that's why I say this is weak evidence here. And we'll let the scientists look at and try to figure that out. The rubidium strontium, the rock underneath possibly has been exposed to magma from down below that has been replenishing the rubidium. So a little weak there. So that's one I had a chance to look up. This is one I didn't have a chance to look up, but we're talking about potassium argon dating irregularities in rocks, volcanic rocks of known age. So we know when the lava flow occurred, and we can take lab measurements. Again, I have not had a chance to look up the sources here, but it looks like we get some very old atomic clock measurements in rocks that we know were molten within the last century. So we got some big discrepancies that require further scrutiny. Sometimes I feel like if we would just take a little, we would do the work to scrutinize the evidence of evolution, geology, and cosmology, we would, instead of would do better. And scientists, well, we got to give them a reason to scrutinize our evidence better too. All right, some other issues. Moving to the next slide. Here is a tree stump encased in limestone found in England. The limestone was dated to 189 million years old because it's from the Jurassic layer. The tree stump carbon dated to just thousands of years. Of course, carbon dating, we don't expect that to be. All right, next slide, living fossils. So the living fossils, and here again, I've got to admit we've got a weak argument being presented, but I'm going to present it anyway. What is a living fossil? It is an animal that has not changed since it was discovered in the fossil record. The 1938, the British Museum was exhibiting 400 million year old extinct fish called the coelacanth. And you might have heard about this. They considered to be possibly transitioning to a land animal because it had muscles in its fins, that could possibly be used for walking. But in 1938, someone caught one off the coast of South Africa, and the woman pictured here is a local museum director. Down to where the fishermen had caught the fish, but they'd already gutted. She told them, if you find any more of these, we'll pay you to keep them complete. So since then, we found quite a few more. Next, advance, please. Near Madagascar, off the coast of South. And those lower fins are used to swim, not to walk or hop along the bottom of the ocean floor. Let's advance. We've got the horseshoe crab today. Let's compare that to a fossil horseshoe crab from sediments dated to 400 million years ago with an atomic clock. That's just based on the assumption of how long it took that sediment to, how many layers cover that sediment. Horseshoe crabs is something you go to the beach in Florida, and they look the same as the ones you'll find in the early fossil layers. So you can see other examples of fossils. Middle Jurassic fossils from Solnhofen, Germany. You can see what this animal is. It's a shrimp and a dragonfly. The argument that's being that Dr. Hudson is making is that over 150 million years you would expect more change. I don't buy that argument because you can see animals in Australia who look similar to animals on other continents, but they are not they're entirely, they're very, and by their means of reproduction, they're very different. And yet they're very similar because they function in similar ecological niches. So I would figure that an animal has found an ecological niche would not change no matter how long the time has been. So weak, I'm going to say that's weak. And if you're a Christian, you're feeling discouraged by that argument being that I'm not, please we it's going to look it looks better for us to be honest than to be making arguments that are that can be seen to be weak. Another example of is this valley in Australia. This okay, and if you advance, you'll see a picture of David Noble. He was a young Australian ranger working for their park service, and he did a survey of things in a canyon that was accessible only by rope. Went in, and he came out with information about a tree he had seen there that had not been seen anywhere before. He found a little grove of trees that seemed to be South Australian pine, South Pacific pine, sorry. And what he had discovered was living Wollemi pines, and they had been seen before in the fossil record, supposedly 200 million years old and thought to be long extinct. But somehow a population survived with no obvious change for 200 million years. So, next. Okay, my slide is not advancing. There we go. Okay, and then we found these footprints when we were talking about the flood. These are identical to modern bird footprints. They have a backward pointing toe for perching on branches, but they predate by 55 million to the geologic dating of the sedimentary rocks, the first records of any bird fossil. All right. Another slide, the missing rock or unconformities. I find this argument to be something that is more convincing. There's you have parts of the world where you're missing 1 billion years of the geologic column, and yet, as you can see, it's the layers are level, and erosion does not make things level. So you could, I'm sure you could, that if you're a geologist, it would be your job to find an explanation, but it's not easy to explain. Now, the fourth and final dating issue has to do with miracles of preservation. Now, we don't really know, if you advance to the next slide, how long proteins can be preserved when they're buried thousands of feet without oxygen. Expect it to be millions of years old. So we've so we have this been opening bones of dinosaurs and finding organic materials like proteins that were thought not to be possible to be preserved in fossils, and have been finding them. So this is a short list of some that have been found. So Triceratops, duck-billed dinosaur, dinosaur eggs from Argentina, seismosaur from New Mexico, mosasaurs, scorpion and the lizard. We got to be careful and scrutinize the evidence. Could there also have been bacteria down there that might have left? But yeah, look close enough, you can rule out those alternate explanations. And I believe that has been done, because I've been hearing about dinosaur feathers and soft tissue remnants being found, and I've been finding that they can reconstruct some of the colors of dinosaurs based on the traces of pigments that were left in the rocks. All right. We also been told it takes millions of years for some things to form, like coal and petrification and stalactites and opal and oil and so forth. And we can see now all of these materials can be made in short periods of time rather than requiring millions of years as previously thought. So possibly it's just a matter of information wasn't there when the early geologists were looking at it, and it is now. So some of these, like oil, are clearly examples of lots and lots of organic material that was buried under rock and cooked over time into oil, and they're still in reservoirs. It's hard to account for the amount of organic material that suddenly got covered by rocks in the past and then baked into oil without considering a flood event. On the other hand, for full disclosure, we have to explain how so much is there, because there is a lot down there, and all been on the earth living at the time. So it's something we would need to check out. So let's not jump to conclusions. So how could it have gotten down? All that living material have gotten down there without a cataclysmic flood? How could so much have gotten down there if it was just in a short period? So let's move on. Okay. Now, if you go to Mammoth Hot Springs in Yellowstone National Park, you can see calcium carbonate forming rocks practically as you are watching them. And you can see in this picture, mineral-rich waters creep over and start to cover the legs of this observation platform with new rock. We're in Yellowstone a few years ago and saw trees that were dying alive because the hot mineral waters had reached their roots and they had started to suck up all those rock. Next slide. It is fundamental in making stalactites, like this picture of Carlsbad Caverns. So if you go to Carlsbad Caverns, typically they will say that these took many, maybe hundreds of thousands of years to make. We were there, and they were told these caverns were the remains of an ancient coral reef. But if you advance, you'll see I don't know if this stalactite is from Carlsbad Caverns, but you can see that it grew at different rates. You can see the central part grew very quickly. And then there's a couple of layers laid down later that were laid down slowly. So you can't just make assumptions based on the current size of a stalactite. You got to cut it open and see what's been going on. And then in Carlsbad Caverns that have been mostly dry, to know what's been going on. So, but if you have a lot of hot water, minerally saturated water, you can make these things pretty quickly. 24 to 1988, there was a visitor sign above the entrance to Carlsbad Caverns that said Carlsbad was at least 260 million years old. In 1988, the sign was changed to read 7 to 10 million years old. Then for a while, the sign read that it was 2 million years old. Now the sign is gone. All right, next slide. So these are some challenges to the dating. The geologic column is very old. So uniformitarianism, not even something that even geologists really defend anymore. Erosion of continents. If the erosion of continents at our known current rate is applied over evolutionary time, the continents should have eroded away several times over in Earth's history. The Earth's magnetic field, if you wind the clock back at its current rate of decay, you would go back to where it was hotter and stronger. It could have been a serious threat to the health and life of plant and animals on the subjects, among others, illustrate some of the flaws of a worldview founded on formitarian principles. Like I said, this is attacking somewhat of a straw man. Evolutionists do not base their theories on longer. But these are things that require further scrutiny. I believe scientists are scrutinizing them, and we can be. We don't define, but we can expect, as if the Bible is reliable, that the more they scrutinize, the more in harmony with the Bible's account of origins their findings are going to be. All right. And okay, we're now going to about something called entropy or decay. You start with if you put a drop of dye in a bowl of water, that drop of dye is not going to stay in the form of a drop. It's going to gradually spread throughout that bowl, and you cannot. It takes a lot of effort to turn that drop of dye. Probably have to boil that water off, condense the water here, and then you get the drop of dye again, and then you can put that dye back in the water and do it all over again. That's entropy. So the idea that some physical processes go only one way, they cannot be reversed without a lot of energy being put to the system to reverse it. Okay, now we'll hear what Dr. Hudson has to say about that.
One of the greatest questions in the subject of origins has to do with how old life is on planet Earth. Evolutionists tend to think billions of years. Creationists tend to think thousands of years. Some of this boils down to the subject of how old are the rocks. Now, when we date igneous rocks like lava here at the Kilauea volcano on the island of Hawaii, we find out that there's potassium, a metalloid, and argon, a gas. And how long it takes for potassium to break down in argon is a way of determining how old the lava is. So let's take a look now at these methods of dating and take a look and see how reliable they might be.
In my view, what is the biggest challenge for a creationist model scientifically? I would say probably the issue of dating, the issue of the age that is attributed to rocks formations, or the time that is actually required for particular geological processes to occur. Therefore, that area, I think, still presents a lot of challenges, and it's something that we need to study, and we are interested in understanding more.
Well, geometric dating actually is a group of dating methods. It's not a single method. It basically is trying to use radioactive elements. Those are elements who are gradually changing into some other element, and using that to measure how much time has passed. You could think of it sort of like an hourglass. And in fact, people from many different perspectives have used that illustration. The hourglass starts out element at the top, and then it runs through a small area which allows a measured amount of parent element to change into daughter element at the bottom. And if you measure the amount of parent element and you measure the amount of daughter element, you might get a time out of it. Now, of course, there are all kinds of problems with that. One of them is that you don't know for sure always exactly how much parent element you started out with.
So one of the questions is, has the carbon-14 in the atmosphere been constant over time? And in fact, it has not. Everybody recognizes that it's varied. So that depends on the amount of cosmic rays that hit the atmosphere. It's related to the Earth's magnetic field, the shielding from the cosmic rays. And so the carbon-14 community has developed methods of calibrating using tree rings and other methods to estimate what the true age is in comparison with the carbon-14 age. And so carbon-14 is generally accepted by everybody to work quite well for the last few thousand years. The further you go back, the more uncertainty there is based on the calibrations. The radiometric ages are often very difficult for me to understand in a short time frame. I've recently written a book chapter that kind of outlines my approach to these things. And as I work with these ages, as a person who believes in the Bible, I've kind of summarized the way I deal with it under 6 points. One is, I look at the history of science and see that science developed within a Christian framework in Western Europe. And the first scientists, the fathers of science, were Bible-believing Christians. So I believe that it's possible to see God as creator and do good science as I look at his creation in the context of the founding fathers of science. Second, I look at what the big issue is. For me, the big issue is that God is a good and a powerful God. And like Charles Darwin, I have a problem seeing that this good God would specifically create the evil I see in the world and in nature. And I think that God wants to get the bad stuff over as quickly as possible. So the bad stuff will only be there for a limited amount of time. Third, I am anxious to do good science. So as I do my scientific research, I realize I'm studying God's creation, and I'm very careful with the data and not making claims from the data that cannot be supported. Fourth, as I look at the Genesis record, I find evidence for changes in rates. I find the evidence for water being a major geological factor. And therefore, as I do my geology research, I'm looking for evidence for changes in rates of geological processes, the effects of water on the processes I'm working on. The fifth, and probably one of the overarching pictures that I use, is I recognize my own human limitations, that God is so much greater than I am, that he has 1,000 ways to do things that I don't know anything about. And although I feel like evidence and reason is extremely important, I realize that there needs to be more than that, and God has many ways to do things. And finally, number 6, as I am working on understanding the natural world, and as I'm working on understanding on how it's related to the Bible, I find it very important to treat people well. And it's easy to denigrate people on one side or another, but I don't find that to be helpful. Sometimes I don't do a very good job of living up to that goal, but I do find that to be very important, that I treat people well, both the people that I agree with and the people that I may not agree with. So radiometric dating is a difficult topic, but I found that these 6 guidelines help me in knowing how to deal with some of the difficulties.
So what these rocks are doing is what all igneous rocks are doing. In fact, we might say all of creation in a way, as we are all seeing movement toward decay. Rocks are decaying. And why is that? If you have an old Geiger counter, you can pick up the ticks, the radioactivity of some kinds of rocks. Those rocks are decaying. That's why you get those clicks. So what is it about our creation that is decaying? Why is it going apart, falling apart? Let's take a look in the Bible and see if we can find answers for the origins of decay.
Oh, I guess I misremembered. I thought he was going to talk about that. But all right, it's up to me. I wish he had done it because I feel like the material he gave me makes a weak argument, unfortunately, because there's the decay doesn't mean that there's life is impossible. We experience life daily. Each organism is an entropy fighting machine. It takes in that energy in order to reverse the decay processes in order to maintain life. Once that machine fails, then we experience death. But I don't really see there being a contradiction between the existence of decay and entropy and evolution, because evolutionists acknowledge the need for some outside source of energy in order to maintain the process. They're not saying that it can happen by itself. Although they do, cosmologists will say that eventually, maybe trillions of years from now, the whole universe will no longer have any energy sources with which to sustain life, and life will then become impossible. Not in any period of time that we can expect to survive to see, but they say that from as far as they can tell, there is ultimately no future. So it's somewhat of a discouraging scenario if you want to look at as far forward as possible. So it might seem baffling to you if you are not already a believer in the Bible, why Christians would be trying to defend the Bible against science instead of just waiting for the science to sort itself out and believe whatever. In the meantime, whatever is the most likely given the information available to us now. Well, the reason is the Bible is not just a source of geological or biological information to us. The Bible has meaning to us. We see it as a message from our all-knowing God who cares about us and used it to communicate with us. We want to believe that that's reliable. Now, how did Ussher come up with his precise date for the age of the world? Not that we agree that his calculations were correct, but this was his method. He took modern chronology as far back as he could go, and then he managed to find some overlaps with the genealogies in the book of Genesis, and use that to get back to the beginning. And so Genesis means the origin, the book. It's the book of beginnings. It's unusually interested in chronology, with listing generations in different ways. And as I said, Ussher found that he was able to connect it to dates to modern chronology. So One question relating to genealogies is, are they looking backward or pointing forward? As they relate to time, prophetic scripture is more concerned about what or who is coming than where we have been. So God's word is a reflection of him, and God is always more interested in our future than our past. So although cognizant of the past, the Bible is a forward-looking book. It is more a storybook of real events to strengthen our faith, science book designed to record data for nature research and geological exploration. So Genesis is the first chapter. What is the story being told? Before we do this, if I want to put out a question, I think that I don't see anyone here who has expressed they are only don't believe the Bible. But my question is, if there were such an all-knowing God trying to communicate with you, would he reach you? Would his communications? Would you get his communications, or have you set up such a bar so high that you see the message? We're going to go look at a sample right now of what message you might find if you did look. Genesis 1 verse 2 says, the earth was without form and void, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters at the very beginning of creation. So advance the slide, please. So was there stuff like rock and water made by God in an earlier, before the sixth-day creation of life? For us, that's not the issue. The lava flows in between fossil records is the issue. That's the challenge for us who are trying to support the Bible's account of the Earth's history. Now, Dr. Hudson says the biggest problem for evolution is the issue of decay or entropy. Like I said, I don't buy in that, but let's take a look at how the Bible records creation happening. It says that the earth began without form and void, or in Hebrew, tohu and bohu. The end of the U on the end of a word means no. So no form, no fill. In the Hebrew way of writing, these two words form the poetic framework for the story of God creating the earth. So God has organization in mind as he forms three areas. Advance, please, twice. So first, he create. Okay, do we have anyone advancing slides? Okay, one more time. There we go. So first, we got three areas. We got heavens on day one, sea on day and sky on day two, dry land on day three. So he forms three areas, and then on the next 3 days he fills those three areas. He fills the sky with sun and moon and birds and fish, and the earth with animals and man. And then he pauses, steps back, and declares that it is very good. But he doesn't leave. He stops and makes time for a non-creative activity. He creates a day for relationship, for fellowship with the new world and the people he has made. So it is a day placed in a sacred weekly rhythm. We exist because God loves life and especially made us in his image. So creation is completed with the Sabbath day, a weekly day of rest, of non-creating, relational time, a holiday of mutual celebration for life and the life giver. Creationists view time as given from the hand of God. So let's examine time as a concept for a moment. Why did God take so long to create the earth? Why 6 full days? Why not simply say in a Big Bang style, let there be everything? First, time from the hand of a timeless being is more about rhythm than duration. It doesn't really matter to God how long it is because he's got unlimited time. Science measures time and God places meaning within time. We know, okay, let's, see, did I, yeah, we're good. We know how long the year is from studying astronomy. It's one Earth revolution around the sun. The length of the month is approximately the moon revolving around the Earth in a month. And finally, the length of a day is the day it takes the Earth to rotate on its axis one time. So one rotation equals 1 day. So where do we get the week from? Since there's nothing astronomical about the week. That I have had the challenge before. Someone trying to say that the week is the result of dividing the month up, and that at some in the past we change it to a week. And my question eventually was, so when did this happen? Just kept looking at different possible times that it could have. There wasn't any time that was plausible. So if you look up where the week, it's according to reference, week was adopted from the biblical account of creation, where it took God 6 days to create the universe and then rested the seventh day. Genesis 2 verse 3 reads, "Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he rested." The word here there is for rest is Sabbath. God Sabbathed from all his work which God had created and made. Creation was complete from the artist's hand. It was very good. Okay? Filling it with eternal goodness, and made it a day distinct and different from other days, even though they are all about 24 hours each. In the Hebrew thinking, something that is sanctified is set aside for a very special purpose. Abraham Joshua Heschel has declared that on the seventh day God made no material thing, but instead only a space in time. God gave a non-creating and creation enjoying purpose to a day's worth of time. The Sabbath was meant to be a weekly fellowship with the Creator and his creation. This was the original intent. In Exodus 20, verse 8 to 11, the weekly Sabbath is to be a memorial day of creation, spent in rest with their Creator. In Deuteronomy 5, verses 12 to 15, this weekly Sabbath day is also given the purpose of remembering their oppression and captivity and celebrating deliverance from bondage in Egypt, to worship God as one's conscience dictates. However, because of sin, creation has been marred, losing much of its original beauty. As a result, death and decay have entered into this world. We can see it all around. While science can forensically measure the decay, the reality that Dr. Hudson believes falsifies of progress that is claimed for evolution. Like I said, evolutionists are not claiming that there is progress inherent to the universe itself. They're claiming that we happen to live in an exceptional part of the universe that's receiving the energy necessary for that progress. How can genetic decay create new and more complex things? Instead, entropy has come to God's creation. That's an important point there. If you look at the Bible's account and compare that to the fossil record, there must have been dramatically more variation and diversity of life in the past, and we're getting less diversity today. That our evolution is not keeping up with the loss of diversity. Now, today, we human beings are responsible for a large part of that, but it's hard to believe that there's been any time in the past when evolution could have kept up with the loss of diversity over time. According to the Bible, it is a temporary development, and that's good news for many. The Apostle Paul describes the impact of evil, the decaying of creation. For the creation was subjected to futility. Oh, yes, advanced. Not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope. Can we get to the slide with the moon on it? Because the creation itself also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption. For we know that the whole creation groans and labors with birth pangs together until now. So notice the wording here. The creation was subjected to futility. This is talking about something that has happened to this world, something unexpected. Genesis 3 tells the story of what happened when the serpent deceives humanity and subjects the world under a curse. Genesis 5 traces a timeline of spiritual or moral decay between creation and the flood, though it is also tracing this of promise forward. The overall trajectory is downward. So this is futility, the bondage of corruption. The world is affected. The whole creation, is groaning under it. Decay was not the original intent for God's perfect world and the creatures on it. Instead, because of Adam and Eve's choices, God stepped back. Because of that, the world was subject to futility. So it is a bondage of corruption. The word corruption means decay. We're still on the moon slide here. The ruin that evil has forced upon his beautiful world, but he was not caught off guard. The Bible says that contingency plan before the foundation of the world. He went searching for Adam and Eve so he could save them. He promised to solve the problem by sending the Eve. So amidst the curses, God gave humanity hope. God gave hope to a frightened and hopeless couple that God can fix what the devil has infected with decay and death. Paul's passage tells us this, that the creation was subjected to death are temporary things. But for now, creation groans. Paul says we also groan. And then Paul even says that God groans too. For we do not know what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit makes intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. I believe God wants the pain and sorrow and warring to stop more than we do. This is also part of the story, the rest of the story that we need to hear. And it's very good news, for we are looking forward to a universe that sees no more decay and death. From the Old Testament book of Isaiah, the words of Jesus to a dying thief on a cross, and from the last two chapters of the last book of the Bible, Revelation, they all speak of what we long for: paradise, an earth restored, life as God purposed from the beginning. When it comes to living in this decaying world, Jesus tells us the way we should approach it. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where rust destroys, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, a place where neither biological or chemical decay takes place and things last for eternity. Lasting for eternity is what God always planned for us if we put our trust in Him. So, you can go to the last slide now. If you don't have the Christian background and you've been wondering, why would we even want to believe in a creator? We live in such a messed up, awful world, and life looks so futile. We put in so much effort and with no hope of any different result than all of us dying. That's not the message of the Bible. It's not just that there's a creator. It's not just that that God started things. It's that God, the way things are now, is not, and He's going to restore His plan. And He's trying to give, He's through the Bible, He's giving us a glimpse of that future and inviting us to be a part of it. So, next week we will be studying or 2 weeks. Yes, 2 weeks. Please disregard what came up on that second slide. It'll be May 6th. Will be our last origin series. We'll be looking at the origin of the universe and the Big Bang.